So this one here is kind of a follow-up, I suppose, to what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
What do you think about DLSS in upcoming lower-end GPUs? While it seems like a massive boost to their performance, it also gives worse results in lower resolutions. So we found that definitely be true, and we have spoke of that before, and that can be a bit of a problem when evaluating DLSS. So basically what this question is alluding to is when people evaluate DLSS, reviewers such as ourselves, they typically take like a 3080 or a 3090 because it's the most exciting flagship GPU to test features out with, and therefore they do so at 4K. So you're taking a much higher resolution sample to then upscale essentially, and therefore you have more data to work with. You get a more accurate picture. But then when you scale right down to like 1080p, you're looking at 720p or lower, less data to work with, and then more gaps have to be filled in essentially, and you can sometimes get a blurrier or lower quality image. So we've certainly seen that is the case, or more often than not is the case. So how will that affect lower end GPUs? Well, I think to circle back to the discussion earlier, we were saying where DLSS is most beneficial isn't necessarily, obviously it's used to make up the difference with ray tracing and stuff like that, but so in those instances, you want DLSS to be of high quality because you're enabling ray tracing to increase the image quality. But then if you enable DLSS and it makes the image look worse, then it's kind of going backwards by doing that. This is separate. You're wanting to just outright boost native resolution performance. You're wanting more FPS and you're not caring about ray tracing. I think in that instance, the blurriness you may get at the lower resolutions is less of an issue because you're probably wanting to do that in games like Fortnite, Call of Duty, the games we spoke of earlier, Battlefield type games. And if the image is a bit softer, a bit blurrier, but you're getting much better, input latency and much higher frame rates and the feel of the game's better, then I think that's probably a trade-off that almost all people playing those sort of competitive style of games are willing to make.
Yeah, I think it's almost like DLSS does kind of different things depending on the different tier of cards that you're looking at. Like if you're buying a high-end GPU, a lot of the time you can run those games at high frame rates anyway. It's going to be more about improving image quality. Gaming at 4K is much more likely to be done on a 3080 as opposed to a lower end GPU. Whereas on the lower end, it's more about, well, a lot of the time you may not be getting sufficiently high frame rates. Like you may be in the 1440p 40 to 60 FPS zone, in which case DLSS is going to push you up that tier in terms of performance and make it more playable, give you more consistent performance. So yeah, there becomes kind of a different discussion. You're less focused on the image quality, you're more focused on the performance. The things I'm interested in is seeing how much things like Nvidia's driver overhead issue impact lower end GPUs when running with DLSS, because for example, a lower end buyer is more likely to be running with a CPU that is on the lower end of the scale, which is more likely to come into the overhead issues, and DLSS lowers the resolution and increases CPU load.
So you may get no percentage increase or very little.
So yeah, it is possible that in some setups that DLSS isn't as effective as it is at high resolution.
Yeah, that could be
on higher end GPUs.
Yeah, well, obviously if you've got the CPU horsepower there, it'll be as effective. But if you don't have it there, so reviewers testing these lower end GPUs with DLSS, which I think DLSS is a great feature for these lower end GPUs personally. But yeah, it can be a little bit misleading if a reviewer is testing with the 10900K, 1100K, 5950X, whatever, a very high-end Core i9 or Ryzen 9 processor that has plenty of CPU power, and you're seeing, let's say a 40% uplift with DLSS enabled. But then if you use, a Ryzen 5 2600 or something even lower end, you may see no performance increase because you're already CPU limited. The potential for something like that to happen is certainly there, and obviously with the overhead issue requiring more CPU, you'll run into that sooner. So yeah, maybe.
It's going to be a balancing act to find where that point is, though. I'm not saying it's definitely going to be the case, but it is something that is going to, you're going to have to find where it happens.
Yeah, where you're going to, again, in my opinion, where you're going to want those extra frames is your Fortnites, your Call of Duties, your Battlefields. They are CPU intensive games. So yeah, I think it's something that we will definitely look into. We'll probably test those GPUs using a high-end flagship CPU and then something more, more mainstream, more lower end, let's say.
Yeah, it'd be interesting at least.